The chemistry lab erupted in chaos as beakers shattered against the floor, creating a symphony of breaking glass that echoed through the hallways of Riverside High School. In the center of the mayhem, 3 students had cornered a girl with dark hair against the lab benches, their hands already reaching for the project she clutched desperately to her chest. The meticulously crafted molecular model represented weeks of painstaking work, each atom carefully positioned and labeled in her precise handwriting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Look what we have here," sneered Jessica Chen, her voice dripping with mock sympathy as she examined the trembling girl before her. "Little Miss Perfect thinks she can waltz into our school and show us all up with her fancy science project." Jessica's perfectly straightened hair swayed as she tilted her head, studying her victim like a predator sizing up prey. The silver rings adorning her fingers caught the fluorescent lighting as she reached toward the delicate structure of interconnected spheres and rods. Mia Rodriguez stood frozen, her knuckles white as she gripped her chemistry assignment. The 3-dimensional representation of a complex protein molecule had taken her countless hours to complete, each component researched and assembled with the dedication that had earned her straight A's at every school she'd attended. But this was Riverside High, her 7th school in 6 years. And already the pattern was beginning again. New school, new bullies, same terror. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Mia calculated her chances of escape. To her left stood Tyler Brooks, a linebacker whose massive frame blocked any hope of reaching the door. His friend Connor Walsh leaned casually against the lab bench to her right, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of violence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Behind Jessica, other students had gathered to watch the spectacle, their phones already recording what they expected would be another routine humiliation. "Please," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible above the whispered conversations of their audience. "I just want to turn in my assignment and go to class." Her accent carried the faintest hint of her childhood in California, before her father's military career had begun dragging their family from base to base, state to state, always searching for stability that never seemed to last more than a year or two. Jessica laughed, a sound like breaking glass that made several students in the crowd wince. She had ruled Riverside High's social hierarchy since middle school, building her empire on a foundation of fear and intimidation that even the teachers seemed reluctant to challenge. Her family's wealth had purchased influence throughout the small town of Cedar Falls, and everyone understood that crossing Jessica Chen meant crossing a family with enough lawyers and political connections to make problems disappear. "Turn in your assignment?" Jessica's voice rose in mock surprise. "But we haven't had a chance to examine your work properly. Class, what do you think of our new student's project?" She gestured dramatically toward the molecular model, her movements calculated to build tension among their growing audience. Mia's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the signs she'd learned to read at school after school. The circling predators, the gathering crowd, the teachers mysteriously absent when violence was about to erupt. She'd tried running before, tried hiding, tried blending into the background until her family inevitably moved again. But something felt different this time, a steel core of determination that her father had spent years trying to forge within her. Staff Sergeant David Rodriguez had served 3 tours overseas before retiring to focus on raising his daughter alone after his wife's death in a car accident 5 years earlier. He'd taught Mia discipline, respect, and the importance of standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. More importantly, he'd enrolled her in martial arts classes at every base they'd lived on, insisting that she learn to protect herself in a world that wasn't always kind to military children who moved too often to form lasting friendships. Tyler stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over Mia's small frame. At barely 5 feet tall and weighing perhaps 90 pounds soaking wet, she appeared laughably outmatched against the 3 students who had made tormenting newcomers their favorite pastime. "You know what I think, Jess? I think our new friend here needs to learn how things work at Riverside. Maybe if her precious little project had an accident, she'd understand that some people just don't belong here." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Several students held their phones higher, angling for better shots of what they assumed would be another viral humiliation video. In the back of the group, a few faces showed concern rather than excitement, but none of them possessed the courage to intervene when Jessica Chen decided someone needed to be taught a lesson. Connor cracked his knuckles with deliberate theatricality, each pop echoing through the lab like small explosions. Accidents happen all the time in chemistry class. Dangerous place, all these breakable things lying around. Easy for a clumsy new girl to drop something valuable. His grin revealed teeth stained yellow from the energy drinks he consumed constantly, giving him a predatory appearance that matched his reputation for casual violence. Mia's grip on her project tightened as she calculated distances and angles with the precision her martial arts training had drilled into her reflexes. The lab bench behind her offered no escape route, and the three bullies had positioned themselves to cut off any attempt to reach either exit. But her father's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that size and strength mattered less than technique and timing when properly applied. "Smart girls know when they're beaten," Jessica continued, her voice taking on a sing-song quality that made her words even more menacing. "Smart girls hand over their pretty projects and apologize for thinking they could come into our school and show off." She extended one manicured hand toward the molecular model, her crimson nail polish gleaming like fresh blood under the harsh lighting. "I worked 3 weeks on this assignment," Mia said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Every calculation, every connection, every label. It represents the structure of insulin, the protein that keeps diabetic patients alive. My mother was diabetic." The words carried weight that seemed to surprise Jessica, who had expected tears or pleading rather than quiet defiance. Tyler's laugh boomed through the lab, drawing additional students from the hallway who sensed drama unfolding. "Nobody cares about your sob story, transfer girl. Your mom's dead, your project's about to be dead, and if you don't start showing proper respect, you might join them." The casual cruelty of his words sent murmurs through the crowd, some shocked by his callousness, others energized by the escalating tension. Something shifted in Mia's eyes, a transformation that her father would have recognized immediately. The frightened new student disappeared, replaced by someone who had been forged in discipline and hardened by loss. Her stance subtly changed, feet positioning themselves in a fighting stance so subtle that none of her tormentors noticed the shift. Her breathing slowed and deepened, centering herself the way Master Chen had taught her in the dojo back in North Carolina. "Last chance," Jessica said, her hand now inches from the molecular model. "Give me the project, apologize for being a show-off, and maybe we'll let you sit with the other losers at lunch. Refuse, and we'll make sure everyone in this school knows exactly what happens to people who don't know their place." The threat hung in the air like toxic gas, poisoning the atmosphere and making several students in the back of the crowd shift uncomfortably. Connor moved to Mia's left side, while Tyler positioned himself directly in front of her, their coordination suggesting this wasn't their first time cornering a victim. The lab suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in as the circle of students tightened around the unfolding confrontation. Someone in the crowd called out encouragement to Jessica, while another voice urged Mia to just give them what they wanted. Mia looked at her project one final time, seeing not just hours of work, but a representation of everything her mother had fought against during her final years. The insulin molecule had been her mother's lifeline, the protein that allowed her to maintain some semblance of normal life, even as diabetes slowly destroyed her body. Creating this model had been Mia's way of honoring that memory, of understanding the science that had both sustained and ultimately failed to save the most important person in her world. "You want my project?" Mia asked, her voice carrying a new edge that made Jessica pause momentarily. "You'll have to take it." The words were spoken quietly, but something in their delivery sent a chill through the gathered students. This wasn't the voice of a victim preparing to surrender. This was the voice of someone drawing a line in the sand. Jessica's eyes narrowed as she processed this unexpected resistance. In 3 years of terrorizing Riverside High student body, no one had ever challenged her authority so directly. Teachers might occasionally interfere when things went too far, parents might complain to administrators who were in her family's pocket, but students always eventually submitted to her will. This strange new girl with her perfect grades and her dead mother was about to learn why Jessica Chen ruled this school with an iron fist. "Wrong answer," Jessica snarled, lunging forward to grab the molecular model with both hands. Her fingers closed around the delicate structure, just as Mia's training took over, muscle memory overriding conscious thought as years of practice condensed into a single moment of perfect execution. The lab erupted in gasps and screams as Jessica Chen, queen of Riverside High School, found herself flying through the air with a grace that would have been beautiful if not for the violence of the moment. Mia's hip throw was textbook perfect, using Jessica's own momentum and aggressive lunge to send her sailing over Mia's shoulder in a perfect arc that ended with a thunderous crash into the lab bench behind them. Glass beakers and test tubes exploded like fireworks as Jessica's body collided with the equipment, sending fragments skittering across the floor in a deadly constellation of sharp edges. The molecular model flew from her grasp, spinning through the air in slow motion as every student in the lab watched in stunned silence. Time seemed suspended as the protein structure that had sparked this confrontation traced a perfect parabola before landing intact on a nearby counter, apparently unharmed by the chaos surrounding it. Jessica hit the floor with a sound that made several students gasp in sympathetic pain, her perfect hair now decorated with glass fragments and her designer clothes torn from her violent contact with the lab equipment. She lay motionless for several heartbeats, the only sound in the lab her labored breathing and the gentle tinkling of glass settling on the floor around her. Tyler stared at his leader's prone form, his brain struggling to process what had just occurred. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, their helpless victim had transformed into something dangerous, something that defied every assumption he'd made about the quiet new girl with her perfect grades and her obvious fear. His massive hands clenched into fists as rage replaced confusion, his football player instincts telling him to charge forward and overwhelm this impossible threat through sheer size and strength. Connor's reaction was faster and more violent, his reputation for brutal retaliation demanding immediate action to restore their group's dominance. He grabbed a heavy glass stirring rod from the nearest lab bench, raising it like a club as he advanced on Mia with murder in his eyes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Transfer girl? Nobody touches Jessica and walks away. Mia's stance shifted again, her body flowing into a defensive position as naturally as breathing. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that martial arts were never about seeking violence, but about protecting herself and others when peaceful solutions failed. The crowd of students pressed backward as they sensed the escalation, several pulling out phones to record what they expected would be either Mia's brutal beating or something even more extraordinary. "Stop this right now!" The voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack, freezing Connor mid-swing and drawing every eye in the lab toward the doorway. Mrs. Patricia Hamilton stood framed in the entrance, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and her eyes blazing with authority that came from 30 years of teaching chemistry to generations of Riverside High students. Connor lowered the glass rod slowly, his chest heaving with frustrated aggression as he recognized the one teacher in the building who couldn't be intimidated or bought. Mrs. Hamilton commanded respect through competence rather than fear. And even Jessica's family had learned to tread carefully around the woman who had taught half the town's parents and remembered every favor owed and every secret shared in her classroom. "Everyone out," Mrs. Hamilton commanded, her voice brooking no argument. "Now, except you four," she added, pointing to Mia, Jessica, Tyler, and Connor. "You stay exactly where you are." The crowd of students scattered like startled birds, but not before several managed to upload their footage to social media platforms, where the video of Jessica Chen's spectacular flight would soon begin its viral journey around the internet. Jessica groaned and attempted to sit up, her movements careful and pained as she assessed the damage to her body and her reputation. Blood trickled from several small cuts where glass fragments had found their mark, and her right wrist hung at an angle that suggested serious injury. The perfect facade she had maintained for years lay shattered around her like the broken beakers, revealing something vulnerable and frightened underneath the layers of cruelty and entitlement. Mrs. Hamilton surveyed the destroyed lab with the expression of someone calculating both the financial cost of the damage and the human cost of the confrontation that had caused it. Her eyes lingered on Jessica's injuries before moving to examine Mia, who stood perfectly still with her hands at her sides, displaying none of the defensive posturing that might have suggested she was preparing for further violence. "Miss Rodriguez," Mrs. Hamilton said carefully, "would you care to explain how Miss Chen ended up decorated with my laboratory equipment?" Her tone was neutral, betraying neither accusation nor sympathy as she waited for an explanation that would determine how this incident would be officially recorded and reported. Mia met the teacher's gaze directly, her voice steady as she recounted the events that had led to the confrontation. They cornered me and demanded my chemistry project. When I refused to hand it over, Miss Chen attempted to take it by force. I defended myself using minimal necessary force to prevent the theft of my assignment. Her precise language and calm delivery suggested someone who had been trained to give accurate reports under pressure. Tyler stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. What happened? She attacked Jessica for no reason. We were just talking to her, trying to be friendly, and she went crazy. His version of events bore no resemblance to reality, but his size and reputation as a star athlete had often been enough to make adults believe his word over that of his victims. Connor nodded vigorously in agreement, pointing at the destruction around them. Look at this mess. She destroyed your whole lab, Mrs. H. Jessica's probably got internal injuries from that sneak attack. We should call the police. His voice carried the righteous indignation of someone accustomed to having authority figures accept his version of events without question. Mrs. Hamilton's expression didn't change as she listened to their conflicting accounts, but her eyes moved deliberately toward the security camera mounted in the corner of the lab. The red recording light blinked steadily, indicating that every moment of the confrontation had been captured in high-definition video that would tell the true story of what had transpired in her classroom. Interesting, she said mildly. I suppose we'll let the video evidence speak for itself when Principal Anderson reviews the footage. Her words hit Tyler and Connor like physical blows as they realized their lives would be exposed within hours. Jessica's face went even paler, as she understood that her family's influence wouldn't be enough to erase digital evidence of her attempted theft and subsequent humiliation. Mia carefully retrieved her molecular model from the counter where it had landed, checking each connection and label to ensure nothing had been damaged during the chaos. The protein structure remained perfect, its complex arrangement of atoms still accurately representing the life-saving hormone that had meant so much to her mother's daily survival. She cradled it gently, this physical representation of her dedication and her memories. Principal Anderson will want to speak with all of you, Mrs. Hamilton continued, pulling out her phone to report the incident. In the meantime, Miss Chen needs medical attention for those cuts, and I need to document the damage to my laboratory. She paused, studying Mia with new interest. Miss Rodriguez, where exactly did you learn to execute a throw with that level of precision? My father enrolled me in martial arts classes at every base where we've lived, Mia replied honestly. He wanted me to be able to protect myself. I've been training in various disciplines for 8 years, currently holding a second-degree black belt in judo and a first-degree black belt in karate. Her admission sent visible shudders through Tyler and Connor as they realized how badly they had miscalculated the threat posed by the quiet new girl. Mrs. Hamilton nodded approvingly. Excellent. Training shows in both your technique and your restraint. Despite being outnumbered 3-1, you used exactly enough force to neutralize the immediate threat without causing unnecessary harm. Her professional assessment carried weight that would influence how administrators and parents viewed the incident. Jessica finally managed to struggle to her feet, her injured wrist cradled against her chest as she glared at Mia with naked hatred. This isn't over, she hissed through gritted teeth. You have no idea what you've done. My family owns this town, and when my father hears about this, you'll be expelled before the end of the week. Military brat or not, you picked the wrong person to mess with. The threat hung in the air like poison gas, but Mia's expression remained calm as she faced down the girl who had ruled Riverside High through fear and intimidation. I didn't pick this fight, she said quietly. You chose to steal my assignment, and I chose to stop you. If your family wants to make this into something bigger, that's their decision. But I won't apologize for defending my property or standing up for myself. Tyler moved protectively closer to Jessica, his loyalty to their group's leader overriding his growing fear of Mia's unexpected capabilities. You broke her wrist, psycho. That's assault. My dad's a lawyer, and he's gonna make sure you pay for what you did here today. His bravado sounded hollow in the destroyed laboratory, especially with the security camera silently recording his every word. Actually, Mrs. Hamilton interjected, assault requires intent to cause harm. Miss Rodriguez appears to have executed a defensive maneuver in response to attempted theft. The injuries Miss Chen sustained were the direct result of her own aggressive actions and the unfortunate presence of breakable laboratory equipment. Her legal interpretation would carry significant weight when administrators reviewed the incident. Connor's face twisted with frustration as he realized their usual tactics weren't working against either Mia or Mrs. Hamilton. This is bullshit. She's some kind of trained killer, and you're acting like she's the victim here. What if she decides to attack other students? What if someone gets seriously hurt next time? His appeal to safety concerns was a desperate attempt to regain some advantage in a situation that had spiraled completely beyond their control. Then perhaps, Mrs. Hamilton said with dangerous quiet, certain students should consider whether their behavior toward their classmates might be creating situations where violence becomes necessary. Miss Rodriguez didn't seek out this confrontation. It was brought to her by students who assumed she would be too weak or too frightened to defend herself. The school nurse arrived with a wheelchair and first aid supplies, immediately beginning to assess Jessica's injuries while shooting disapproving glances at the destruction surrounding them. The glass fragments were superficial, but her wrist showed clear signs of fracture that would require X-rays and possibly surgery to repair properly. As Jessica was wheeled toward the medical office, she continued to shoot venomous looks at Mia, her mind already working on plans for revenge. Principal Anderson appeared in the doorway, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage to one of the school's most expensive laboratories. David Anderson had been trying to maintain order at Riverside High for 12 years, constantly fighting against the influence of wealthy families who believed their money could purchase exemptions from rules and consequences. The sight of Jessica Chen injured and surrounded by broken glass suggested that his carefully maintained balance of power was about to be severely tested. "Mrs. Hamilton," he said wearily, "please tell me this isn't what it looks like." His hope for a simple explanation died as he noticed the positioning of the remaining students and the obvious signs of violence that had occurred in the normally pristine laboratory. Mrs. Hamilton handed him a written preliminary report she had been preparing while waiting for his arrival. "I'm afraid it's exactly what it looks like, David. Miss Chen, Mr. Brooks, and Mr. Walsh cornered Miss Rodriguez and attempted to force her to surrender her chemistry assignment. When she refused, Miss Chen became physically aggressive, and Miss Rodriguez defended herself using martial arts techniques that resulted in the damage you see around us." Principal Anderson read through the report quickly, his frown deepening with each detail. "Security footage?" he asked hopefully, though he already knew the answer from Mrs. Hamilton's confident demeanor. "Complete coverage from 2 different angles," she confirmed. The camera system captured the entire incident from initial confrontation through resolution. Miss Rodriguez's actions appeared to be entirely defensive and proportional to the threat she faced. Her professional assessment would make it difficult for the Chen family's lawyers to craft a narrative that painted their daughter as an innocent victim. Tyler and Connor exchanged worried glances as they realized their versions of events wouldn't survive contact with video evidence. Their usual strategy of overwhelming authority figures with combined testimony was useless when electronic witnesses could contradict their lies. Both boys began calculating how much trouble they were facing and whether their family's local influence would be enough to minimize the consequences. "Miss Rodriguez," Principal Anderson said, turning his attention to the girl who had single-handedly upended his school's social hierarchy, "I'll need you to provide a detailed written statement about what occurred here today. Your father will also need to be contacted immediately." His tone was carefully neutral, but Mia could hear the underlying tension that suggested this incident would have far-reaching consequences. "Yes, sir," Mia replied respectfully. "Should I call my father now, or would you prefer to contact him through official channels?" Her cooperative attitude contrasted sharply with the defensive posturing of the other students involved, further supporting Mrs. Hamilton's assessment of who had been the aggressor in this confrontation. Principal Anderson could respond. His secretary appeared in the doorway with a worried expression. "Sir, we've got a problem. That video of the fight is already online and going viral. Local news stations are calling for comments, and several parents are demanding explanations about school safety." The secretary's words confirmed everyone's worst fears about how quickly information spread in the social media age. Principal Anderson's shoulders sagged as he realized this incident wouldn't be contained within the school's normal disciplinary procedures. A viral video of a teenage girl throwing the daughter of one of the town's most powerful families would bring scrutiny from multiple directions, forcing him to navigate between competing interests while trying to maintain some semblance of fairness and order. Mia stood quietly in the center of the destroyed laboratory, her molecular model still clutched in her hands like a talisman. Around her, adults scrambled to manage the fallout from a confrontation she hadn't wanted but hadn't been able to avoid. Her father had taught her that standing up for herself would sometimes come with consequences, but she suspected even his military experience hadn't prepared him for the political storm that was about to engulf their family. The security footage would vindicate her actions, but Mia understood that truth and justice didn't always align in the real world. Jessica Chen's family possessed resources and connections that could make life difficult for a military veteran and his daughter, regardless of who had been right or wrong in this particular confrontation. The viral video might make her famous, but fame wasn't always a blessing when it came with powerful enemies. Mrs. Hamilton began collecting glass fragments and documenting the damage for insurance purposes, her movements efficient and professional despite the chaos surrounding her. She had seen enough teenage drama over the years to recognize when something significant had shifted, and the dynamics at Riverside High School would never be quite the same after today's events in her chemistry laboratory. As Mia waited for her father to arrive and for the full consequences of her actions to unfold, she reflected on the choices that had led to this moment. She could have surrendered her assignment and accepted humiliation as the price of avoiding conflict. She could have transferred schools again, running from bullies like she had done before rather than standing her ground. Instead, she had chosen to fight back, and now everyone involved would have to live with the results of that decision. The broken glass crunched under Principal Anderson's feet as he moved through the laboratory, each step a reminder of how quickly a normal school day could transform into a crisis that would dominate local headlines and test the resolve of everyone involved. In just a few minutes, a chemistry assignment had become the focal point of a battle between those who believed power entitled them to take whatever they wanted and those who refused to be victims of that philosophy. Mia's phone buzzed with notifications as classmates began sharing the viral video and tagging her in social media posts. Some comments praised her courage in standing up to Jessica Chen's notorious bullying, while others condemned her use of violence against a fellow student. The court of public opinion was already forming judgments about an incident they had seen only fragments of, creating narratives that might have little relationship to the complex reality of what had actually occurred. The molecular model in Mia's hand seemed to pulse with significance as she realized it had become more than just a chemistry assignment. The protein structure now represented a line drawn in the sand, a declaration that some things were worth fighting for even when the odds seemed hopeless. Her mother's memory, her father's teachings, and her own sense of dignity had converged in a moment of perfect violence that would echo through Riverside High School for years to come. Principal Anderson finally finished his preliminary assessment and turned to address the students still remaining in the destroyed laboratory. All of you will be suspended pending a complete investigation of this incident. Your parents will be contacted immediately, and will schedule individual meetings to discuss consequences once we've reviewed all available evidence. His words carried the weight of administrative finality, but everyone present understood this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. Sirens wailed in the distance, approaching to transport Jessica Chen to the hospital for treatment of her injuries. Mia prepared herself for whatever came next. She had thrown more than just a bully across the chemistry lab. She had thrown down a challenge to an entire system of intimidation and privilege that had operated unchecked for too long. The consequences would be severe, but for the first time since arriving at Riverside High School, Mia Rodriguez felt like she belonged exactly where she stood. Staff Sergeant David Rodriguez arrived at Riverside High School exactly 23 minutes after receiving Principal Anderson's phone call, his military bearing evident in every stride as he crossed the parking lot toward the main entrance. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel of his pickup truck until his knuckles went white during the drive from the automotive repair shop, where he worked as a civilian mechanic, his mind racing through possibilities and preparing for whatever crisis had befallen his daughter on her third day at yet another new school. The receptionist barely had time to announce his arrival before David was striding through the administrative offices, his steel-toed boots clicking against the polished linoleum with the precision of a man accustomed to military formations. His dark eyes swept the hallway, automatically cataloging exits and assessing potential threats with the paranoia that 3 combat tours had burned into his reflexes. When he spotted Mia sitting calmly in a chair outside Principal Anderson's office, her chemistry project balanced carefully on her lap, Relief flooded through him like cool water. "Mia," he said softly, kneeling beside her chair to examine her face for signs of injury. His calloused hands moved gently over her arms and shoulders, checking for damage with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed battlefield medical assessments under fire. "Are you hurt? Tell me what happened." Mia looked into her father's concerned face and saw the same fierce protectiveness that had carried them through her mother's illness and death, through countless military relocations, through every challenge that life had thrown at their small family. "I'm okay, Dad, but Jessica Chen isn't. She tried to steal my assignment, and when I defended myself, she got hurt. There's video evidence of everything, so the truth will come out, but her family is powerful here. This could get complicated." David's jaw tightened as he processed his daughter's words, recognizing the political undercurrents that often surrounded incidents involving wealthy civilians and military families. He had navigated similar situations on various bases, where the children of high-ranking officers or connected contractors believed their parents' influence could shield them from consequences. The difference here was that he no longer wore a uniform that commanded automatic respect from local authorities. Principal Anderson emerged from his office accompanied by a woman in an expensive business suit, who carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way through intimidation and legal threats. Margaret Chen, Jessica's mother, possessed the same cold beauty as her daughter, but with an additional layer of sophisticated ruthlessness that came from years of using her family's wealth to reshape reality according to her preferences. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Principal Anderson began, his voice carefully neutral, "this is Mrs. Chen, Jessica's mother. We need to discuss the incident involving your daughter and the injuries sustained by Jessica during their altercation." His diplomatic language couldn't hide the tension radiating from both parents as they prepared for a confrontation that would determine how this incident would be officially characterized. Margaret Chen's eyes swept over David's work clothes and calloused hands with barely concealed disdain, clearly cataloging him as someone of inferior social status who could be dominated through superior resources and connections. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, deliberately omitting his military rank, "your daughter violently assaulted my child during what should have been a normal social interaction between students. Jessica is currently undergoing surgery to repair the damage caused by your daughter's unprovoked attack." David's expression remained perfectly controlled, but Mia could see the dangerous stillness that settled over her father when someone threatened his family. It was the same lethal calm she had witnessed when aggressive parents had confronted him at previous schools, mistaking his quiet demeanor for weakness until they discovered their error. "Ma'am," he said with deceptive mildness, "I understand you're concerned about your daughter's injuries. Perhaps we should review the security footage before making accusations about who was responsible for this incident." Mrs. Chen's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her designer handbag as she realized this military mechanic wouldn't be easily intimidated by her usual tactics. Security footage can be edited, misinterpreted, taken out of context. What matters are the facts. My daughter is in the hospital while yours sits here unharmed. That tells us everything we need to know about who the real victim is in this situation. Principal Anderson cleared his throat nervously, recognizing the explosive potential building between the two parents. "Perhaps we should move this discussion to my office, where we can review the evidence privately and determine appropriate next steps." His suggestion was both an attempt to prevent the confrontation from escalating and a recognition that whatever happened next would shape how the school district handled similar incidents in the future. Mrs. Hamilton appeared in the hallway carrying a tablet displaying the security footage from her chemistry laboratory, her expression grim as she approached the group of adults who would decide Mia's fate. "David," she said, nodding respectfully to Mia's father, "I've prepared a complete timeline of events based on the video evidence. I think you should see this before any decisions are made about consequences or blame." The group moved into Principal Anderson's office, where Mrs. Hamilton connected her tablet to the large monitor mounted on the wall. The high-definition footage began playing, showing Jessica, Tyler, and Connor surrounding Mia near the laboratory benches while other students gathered to watch the confrontation unfold. The audio quality was excellent, capturing every word of the threats and demands that preceded the physical altercation. David watched his daughter's measured responses to escalating aggression, recognizing the de-escalation techniques he had taught her during their self-defense training sessions. pride warred with concern as he observed Mia's attempts to avoid violence even when cornered by three larger students who clearly intended to humiliate and intimidate her. When Jessica finally lunged for the molecular model, David's military training allowed him to appreciate the textbook perfection of Mia's defensive throw. Mrs. Chen's face grew progressively paler as the video demolished her narrative of unprovoked assault and innocent victimhood. The footage clearly showed Jessica initiating physical contact, Tyler and Connor positioning themselves to prevent escape, and Mia responding with precisely controlled force that neutralized the immediate threat without causing unnecessary harm. When the video ended, the office fell silent, except for the humming of the air conditioning system. "Well," Principal Anderson said carefully, "the evidence appears to support Miss Rodriguez's account of events. This was clearly a case of self-defense against attempted theft and intimidation." His official pronouncement carried the weight of administrative authority, but everyone present understood that Mrs. Chen possessed resources that could challenge even video evidence if she chose to escalate the matter. Mrs. Chen's voice became dangerously quiet as she processed the destruction of her carefully constructed narrative. "This video proves nothing, except that your daughter used excessive force against a smaller opponent. Jessica was simply trying to examine a school project, and your child responded with violence that could have killed her. Lawyers will ensure that appropriate charges are filed." David's laugh was completely devoid of humor, a sound that made everyone in the office instinctively step backward. "Ma'am, I spent 12 years in the Army, teaching soldiers how to neutralize threats without causing permanent damage. What my daughter did was restraint, not excessive force. If she had wanted to seriously injure your child, believe me, we would be having this conversation in a morgue rather than a hospital." The casual mention of lethal capabilities sent a chill through the room as Mrs. Chen realized she was dealing with someone who understood violence on a completely different level than suburban social dynamics. David's calm demeanor made his words even more unsettling, suggesting a man who had seen enough real combat to remain unimpressed by civilian threats and legal posturing. Mrs. Hamilton stepped forward to diffuse the growing tension between the two parents. "Perhaps we should focus on preventing future incidents rather than assigning blame for this one." Miss Rodriguez defended herself appropriately when cornered by multiple aggressors, but we need to address the underlying culture that made such a confrontation possible in the first place. Principal Anderson nodded eagerly, grateful for any suggestion that might prevent this incident from exploding into a public relations nightmare that would destroy his career. "Absolutely. We'll implement additional anti-bullying measures and ensure that all students understand the consequences of intimidating their classmates. This kind of behavior has no place at Riverside High School." Mrs. Chen's eyes flashed with fury as she realized the narrative was being reframed to make her daughter the villain rather than the victim. "Don't you dare lecture me about bullying. Jessica is the one lying in a hospital bed while your daughter's attacker walks free. This is a clear case of discrimination against a family that contributes significantly to this school district's funding." The threat was implicit, but unmistakable. Continue supporting the Rodriguez family's version of events and face the consequences of lost financial support and political pressure. Principal Anderson's expression showed his recognition of the bind he faced between doing what was right and maintaining the delicate relationships that kept his school adequately funded and his job secure. David stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled as he faced the woman who was threatening his daughter's future. "Mrs. Chen, let me be very clear about something. My daughter didn't start this fight, but she finished it appropriately. If your family chooses to use your money and influence to punish her for defending herself, you'll discover that veterans have resources and connections of our own. We take care of each other." The quiet menace in David's voice carried undertones that suggested consequences beyond legal battles or political maneuvering. Mrs. Chen had built her power on the assumption that wealth could overwhelm any opposition, but she was beginning to understand that military networks operated according to different rules than civilian social hierarchies. A knock on the office door interrupted the escalating confrontation as Dr. Walsh, the school district superintendent, entered the room with an expression that suggested she had already been briefed on the situation's explosive potential. Her political instincts had been honed by years of managing crises that could destroy careers and reputations if handled incorrectly. "Mrs. Chen, Mr. Rodriguez," Dr. Walsh said with professional courtesy, "I've reviewed the preliminary reports and video evidence. This appears to be a clear case of self-defense during an attempted theft. However, given the serious injuries involved, we need to ensure that all parties are satisfied with our response to prevent further escalation. Mrs. Chen seized on the superintendent's diplomatic language as an opening to reassert her family's influence. Dr. Walsh, I'm glad you're here. This incident represents a serious failure of school security that allowed a violent student to attack my daughter without intervention. We expect immediate action to ensure other children aren't endangered by similar incidents. Dr. Walsh's expression remained carefully neutral as she weighed competing pressures from wealthy donors and the need to maintain educational standards that couldn't be compromised by financial considerations. Our investigation will be thorough and fair, taking into account all evidence and testimony. Student safety is our highest priority, which includes protecting students who defend themselves from aggression. David recognized the bureaucratic language that attempted to satisfy everyone while committing to nothing concrete. Dr. Walsh, with respect, my daughter was attacked by 3 students who intended to steal her assignment and humiliate her in front of their classmates. The video evidence clearly shows she used minimal necessary force to defend herself. Any punishment of her actions would send a message that victims should accept abuse rather than resist it. The superintendent nodded thoughtfully, understanding the public relations disaster that would result from punishing a military child for defending herself against wealthy bullies. Mr. Rodriguez, I assure you that our investigation will consider all factors, including the circumstances that led to this confrontation and the proportionality of the response. We want all students to feel safe at school, including your daughter. Mrs. Chen's composure finally cracked as she realized her usual tactics weren't producing the desired results. This is outrageous. My family has donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to this district. We serve on multiple committees and boards. Our support has funded programs that benefit every student in this system. You're treating us like criminals while protecting someone who sent our daughter to the hospital. The naked display of entitled rage confirmed everything that Mia had intuited about Jessica's family background during their brief but violent encounter. Money had purchased influence and protection for so long that the concept of facing actual consequences for their actions seemed incomprehensible to people who had never been held accountable for their behavior. Dr. Walsh's voice remained steady, despite the pressure being applied by one of the district's most powerful donors. Mrs. Chen, your family's generosity is appreciated, but it doesn't change our obligation to investigate incidents fairly and protect all students equally. If we were to ignore evidence of self-defense simply because of financial considerations, we would be failing in our fundamental responsibility to maintain educational environments based on justice rather than wealth. David felt a surge of respect for the superintendent's refusal to be bought or intimidated, recognizing a fellow professional who understood that some principles couldn't be compromised regardless of the personal cost. Dr. Walsh, I appreciate your commitment to fairness. Mia accepts responsibility for her actions, but she won't apologize for defending herself when adults weren't available to intervene. Mrs. Hamilton spoke up from her position near the monitor, still displaying the frozen image of Jessica lying unconscious among broken laboratory equipment. If I may add something, the behavior we witnessed today didn't develop overnight. This was a pattern of intimidation that had been escalating until someone finally stood up to it. Perhaps we should be investigating how such toxic dynamics were allowed to flourish unchecked. Principal Anderson shifted uncomfortably as he realized the investigation might expand beyond the immediate incident to examine his administration's failure to address systemic bullying problems. Mrs. Hamilton raises important points about school culture that we should certainly explore as part of our comprehensive review process. Mrs. Chen's phone buzzed with an incoming call from her husband, whose political connections throughout the county had just been activated to pressure the school district from multiple directions simultaneously. Richard wants to speak with all of you immediately. He's very unhappy about how the situation is being handled, and he's prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to protect our daughter and our family's reputation. The implicit threat hung in the air, as everyone present understood that Richard Chen possessed enough influence to make careers disappear and funding evaporate if he decided the school district had failed to properly support his family's interests. Dr. Walsh's expression remained composed, but David could see the calculation behind her eyes as she weighed the political costs of maintaining her ethical stance. Tell your husband that we welcome his input as part of our investigation process, Dr. Walsh said diplomatically. However, our conclusions will be based on evidence rather than external pressure, regardless of its source. We serve all students and families equally, without favoritism based on financial or political considerations. David's phone also began ringing as word of the incident spread through military networks and veteran communities that monitored threats against service members' families. The caller ID showed Master Sergeant Kelly O'Brien, his former squad leader who now worked as a veterans advocate specializing in educational discrimination cases. The speed with which information had traveled demonstrated that both families possessed resources and allies beyond the local community. Dr. Walsh, David said after checking his phone, "It appears this incident is attracting attention from outside Cedar Falls. I hope the district's investigation will be completed quickly and fairly before external pressures complicate an already difficult situation." His words carried their own subtle warning that military support networks were mobilizing to protect one of their own. Mrs. Chen's voice rose with barely controlled hysteria as she realized her family's usual dominance was being challenged by forces they couldn't easily neutralize through money or political connections. "This is insane. We're being treated like villains when our daughter is the one who was assaulted. What kind of message does this send to other families about safety and justice in our schools?" Mia had remained silent throughout the adult confrontations, but she finally spoke up with the calm certainty that her father had taught her to project under pressure. "Mrs. Chen, I'm sorry Jessica was hurt, but I'm not sorry for defending myself. If she hadn't tried to steal my assignment, none of this would have happened. I hope she recovers quickly and learns that other people deserve the same respect she expects for herself." The simple honesty of Mia's statement cut through the political maneuvering and legal threats to address the fundamental moral question at the heart of the incident. A teenage girl had defended herself against theft and intimidation, using precisely enough force to neutralize the threat without causing permanent damage. Everything else was adults trying to complicate a straightforward case of justified self-defense. Dr. Walsh studied Mia with new interest, recognizing the same uncompromising integrity that her father displayed when facing pressure to abandon his principles. "Miss Rodriguez, do you regret your actions during the incident?" Her question was carefully phrased to elicit either an admission of guilt or a reaffirmation of justified self-defense. "I regret that it was necessary," Mia replied thoughtfully, "but I don't regret protecting my property and my dignity. My father taught me that some things are worth fighting for, and the right to exist without being bullied or robbed is one of them. I would make the same choice again if faced with identical circumstances." Mrs. Chen's face flushed with renewed anger at what she perceived as arrogance and defiance from someone she considered socially inferior. "You see, she's completely unrepentant. She shows no remorse for nearly killing my daughter. This girl is a menace who will hurt other students if she's allowed to remain in this school." David's protective instincts flared at the continued attacks on his daughter's character and mental state. "Ma'am, my daughter showed remarkable restraint in a dangerous situation. Truly violent or uncontrolled, multiple students would have been seriously injured. Instead, she neutralized a specific threat and immediately stopped when the danger passed. That's the behavior of someone with excellent training and discipline." Mrs. Hamilton nodded in agreement with David's assessment. "In 30 years of teaching, I've seen many fights between students. What Miss Rodriguez demonstrated wasn't rage or loss of control. It was calculated defensive action performed with textbook precision. The distinction is important when evaluating both her character and the appropriateness of her response." Dr. Walsh made notes as she listened to the various perspectives being presented, understanding that her decision would establish precedents for how the district handled similar incidents in the future. "I think we have enough information to begin our formal investigation. All parties will be interviewed separately, and we'll conduct a thorough review of school policies to ensure they adequately address the situations that led to this confrontation." Mrs. Chen gathered her expensive purse and designer coat as she prepared to leave, her movements sharp with frustrated anger. "Dr. Walsh, you'll be hearing from our attorneys before the end of the day. This district has failed to protect our daughter, and we won't accept inadequate responses that prioritize political correctness over student safety. Justice will be served one way or another." After Mrs. Chen's dramatic exit, the remaining adults sat in contemplative silence as they processed the implications of what had just occurred. The incident had exposed fault lines in the community that went far beyond teenage social dynamics, revealing fundamental disagreements about power, privilege, and accountability that would influence how this crisis was ultimately resolved. "Mr. Rodriguez," Dr. Walsh said eventually, I want you to know that this district doesn't tolerate bullying from any source, regardless of the perpetrator's family background. However, I also need you to understand that we'll face significant pressure to find fault with your daughter's actions. Are you prepared for a potentially lengthy and contentious process? David's smile was grim, but determined as he considered the battles that lay ahead. Doctor, I've fought in 3 war zones for this country's principles. I'm not about to surrender them in a school conference room because some rich family doesn't like being held accountable for their child's behavior. Mia defended herself appropriately, and will stand by that truth regardless of the consequences. Dr. Walsh nodded approvingly, recognizing the resolve that would be necessary to withstand the political and legal pressure that the Chen family would undoubtedly apply. Very well. Investigation will proceed according to established protocols, and our conclusions will be based solely on evidence and applicable policies. I suggest you document everything and prepare for what may become a public controversy. As the meeting concluded and participants began filing out of the office, Mia finally spoke privately to her father about her concerns for their future in Cedar Falls. Dad, what if they win? What if their money and influence are enough to get me expelled or worse? I can't keep running from bullies, but I don't want to destroy your job or our life here. David placed his hands on his daughter's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes with the same fierce determination that had carried him through combat and single parenthood. Mija, we don't run from bullies, and we don't let them destroy what we've built. If the Chen family wants a war, they'll discover that military families fight differently than civilians. We protect each other, and we never leave anyone behind. The drive home was quiet, as both father and daughter processed the day's events and prepared for whatever challenges would emerge from Mia's split-second decision to defend herself rather than submit to intimidation. The viral video had already reached national attention, with millions of viewers weighing in on the incident through social media comments that ranged from supportive to vitriolic. Their modest rental house felt like a sanctuary after the tension and hostility of the school district offices. But David understood that their privacy and peace were likely temporary luxuries that would evaporate once the Chen family's counterattack began in earnest. He had faced determined enemies before, but never ones who possessed the resources and connections that wealth could purchase in civilian society. That evening, David's phone rang constantly as military contacts, veteran organizations, and advocacy groups reached out to offer support and gather information about the incident that was rapidly becoming a national talking point about bullying, self-defense, and social justice in American schools. Each conversation reinforced his understanding that this was no longer just a local disciplinary matter but a cultural battle, with implications far beyond Cedar Falls. Mia spent the evening completing homework assignments and maintaining her academic routine despite the chaos surrounding her, determined to prove that excellence remained her priority regardless of external pressures. Her molecular model sat on her desk like a trophy, its complex structure serving as a reminder that some things were worth defending, even when the cost seemed overwhelming. The local news featured the incident as their lead story, with carefully edited footage that showed Jessica's dramatic flight through the chemistry laboratory, while omitting the context of threats and attempted theft that had preceded the confrontation. Public opinion was already forming based on incomplete information, creating narratives that bore little resemblance to the complete truth captured by security cameras. By the time they went to bed, both Mia and her father understood that their lives in Cedar Falls would never return to the quiet normalcy they had sought when moving to the small town. The Chen family's wealth and influence guaranteed that this incident would expand into a comprehensive battle for control of the community's values and priorities, with a teenage girl's right to self-defense serving as the symbolic focal point for much larger conflicts. David lay awake planning strategies and contingencies, while Mia reviewed the day's events for lessons that might help her navigate the challenges ahead. Both father and daughter had been forged by adversity into people who didn't surrender when facing seemingly impossible odds, and the Chen family was about to discover that military training created warriors rather than victims when push came to shove. The emergency room at Cedar Falls General Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as medical staff worked to treat Jessica Chen's injuries while her family consulted with a team of lawyers who had arrived within hours of the incident. Richard Chen paced the sterile hallway like a caged predator, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the polished floor as he orchestrated what he privately called damage control, but what everyone else recognized as revenge. Dr. Sarah Martinez emerged from the examination room with X-ray results that would either fuel or deflate the Chen family's campaign for retribution. Jessica's wrist showed a clean fracture that would heal completely with proper treatment, while the various cuts from broken glass were superficial and would leave no permanent scarring. Evidence painted a picture of painful but temporary injuries, rather than the life-threatening assault that Richard Chen needed to justify his planned legal offensive. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Martinez said professionally, "your daughter will make a full recovery. The wrist fracture requires a cast for 6 to 8 weeks, and the lacerations have been cleaned and sutured. She's been given pain medication and will be ready for discharge within the hour." Her clinical assessment was delivered without emotion, but Richard detected the subtle disapproval in her voice as she cataloged injuries that seemed minor compared to the dramatic narrative his family was constructing. Richard's jaw tightened as he processed information that failed to support the serious assault charges his lawyers had been preparing throughout the afternoon. "Doctor, my daughter was thrown through laboratory equipment by another student. Surely there must be additional injuries that haven't been discovered yet. Internal damage, potential concussion, psychological trauma from this vicious attack." Dr. Martinez's expression remained neutral, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen actual violence and wouldn't be party to manufactured victimhood. "Mr. Chen, we've conducted comprehensive tests, including CT scans and neurological assessments. Jessica sustained exactly the injuries I've described, nothing more. Any attempt to claim additional damage would be medically inaccurate and potentially fraudulent." The doctor's refusal to embellish her findings sent Richard into barely controlled fury as he realized his daughter's medical condition wouldn't provide the ammunition needed for criminal charges against the Rodriguez family. He had built his business empire by manipulating facts and purchasing favorable outcomes, but medical professionals operated according to different standards that couldn't be easily corrupted through financial pressure. Margaret Chen stood beside her daughter's hospital bed, stroking Jessica's hair, while whispering promises of retribution that would restore their family's dominance over Cedar Falls' social hierarchies. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she murmured. "Daddy's gonna make sure that girl pays for what she did to you." No one attacks a Chen without consequences, regardless of their military connections or sob stories. Jessica's eyes blazed with hatred despite the pain medication coursing through her system, her mind already working through scenarios for destroying Mia Rodriguez's reputation and future prospects. The humiliation of being thrown across a chemistry laboratory in front of half the school burned deeper than any physical injury, threatening the carefully constructed image of invincibility that had maintained her position as Riverside High's undisputed queen. "I want her expelled," Jessica whispered through gritted teeth, "and I want her family destroyed. Make them understand what happens when nobody's tried to challenge people like us. She thinks her military daddy makes her special, but money talks louder than medals in this town." Her words carried venom that would have impressed her parents if they hadn't been distracted by their own plans for comprehensive revenge. Richard's phone buzzed with updates from his network of political contacts and business associates, who were already working to pressure the school district from multiple directions simultaneously. City council members who owed favors, judges who valued campaign contributions, and bureaucrats who understood the consequences of opposing the Chen family's interests were all receiving calls that emphasized the importance of supporting Jessica's version of events. Attorney Marcus Blackwood arrived at the hospital, carrying legal documents that would transform a high school altercation into a federal case involving civil rights violations and educational discrimination. His reputation for destroying opponents through endless litigation had made him the Chen family's weapon of choice when financial pressure alone proved insufficient to achieve desired outcomes. "Richard," Blackwood said as he entered the hospital room, "I filed preliminary motions seeking emergency injunctions against the Rodriguez girl and demanding her immediate removal from school pending criminal charges. We're alleging assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, destruction of school property, and creating a dangerous environment that threatens other students' safety." Margaret's smile was predatory as she contemplated the legal web that would soon entangle their daughter's attacker. "What about the video evidence? Can we suppress it or challenge its authenticity?" And revealed the family's willingness to manipulate truth itself, if necessary to achieve their goals of punishment and control. Blackwood consulted his notes with the confidence of someone who had successfully twisted facts to serve wealthy clients' interests throughout his career. The video is problematic but not insurmountable. will argue that it fails to show the full context, that your daughter's actions were misinterpreted, and that the Rodriguez girl's response was disproportionate to any perceived threat. Character assassination of the family will be crucial to undermining their credibility. Dr. Martinez overheard enough of the conversation to understand that her medical assessment was being weaponized for purposes that had nothing to do with patient care or factual accuracy. Mr. Chen, I need to be clear that any legal documents must accurately reflect the medical findings. Jessica's injuries, while painful, do not support claims of attempted murder or permanent disability. Richard's voice dropped to dangerous levels as he faced the doctor, who refused to be intimidated into supporting his manufactured narrative. Dr. Martinez, I hope you understand that this hospital receives significant funding from families like ours. It would be unfortunate if your personal opinions about this case affected your professional opportunities or your ability to practice medicine in this community. The naked threat hung in the air like toxic gas as Dr. Martinez realized she was being asked to choose between medical ethics and economic survival. Her expression hardened as she recognized the corruption that the Chen family represented, the willingness to destroy anyone who wouldn't participate in their version of reality, regardless of truth or professional standards. Mr. Chen, she replied with icy professionalism, my medical license is governed by scientific standards, not financial considerations. Any attempt to pressure me into falsifying medical records would be reported to appropriate authorities immediately. I suggest you focus on your daughter's recovery rather than legal strategies based on fictional injuries. The doctor's defiance sent Richard into barely controlled rage as he encountered another professional who wouldn't be bought or intimidated into supporting his family's interests. His business success had been built on the assumption that everyone had a price or a pressure point that could be exploited. But military families and medical professionals seemed to operate according to principles that couldn't be easily corrupted. Meanwhile, across town at the Rodriguez household, David was coordinating his own response to the Chen family's expected counterattack with the precision and thoroughness that had kept his soldiers alive during multiple combat deployments. His laptop screen displayed contact information for veterans advocacy groups, military legal assistance programs, and media organizations that specialized in exposing corruption and injustice. Master Sergeant Kelly O'Brien arrived at David's house carrying files that documented similar cases where wealthy families had attempted to destroy military children who defended themselves against bullying. Her experience as a veterans advocate had taught her to recognize patterns of civilian hostility towards service members' families, particularly when those families refused to accept inferior social status. David, Kelly said as she spread documents across his kitchen table, the Chen family's tactics are predictable but dangerous. They'll try to isolate you from community support while using their money to purchase favorable legal outcomes. We need to get ahead of their narrative and build public support for Mia's actions before they can completely control the story. David studied the case files with the analytical mindset that had made him an effective non-commissioned officer, recognizing strategic principles that applied whether the battlefield was overseas or in a small-town school district. What resources do we have? And more importantly, what are they likely to do that we can counter or anticipate? Her smile was grim as she outlined the Chen family's probable strategy based on previous encounters with wealthy opponents who believed money could overcome any obstacle. They'll attack Mia's character, your fitness as a parent, and your family's right to live in Cedar Falls. Expect accusations of violence, instability, and unfitness for civilian society. They'll try to paint you as dangerous veterans who can't adapt to peaceful communities. The veteran advocate's words confirmed David's worst fears about the battle ahead, but also activated the strategic thinking that had carried him through situations where failure meant death rather than just embarrassment. Then we need to control our own narrative, while exposing their history of using wealth to avoid consequences. What do we know about their previous victims? Kelly pulled out another file containing information about families who had crossed the Chens over the years and suffered comprehensive retaliation that destroyed careers, businesses, and reputations throughout Cedar Falls. They're methodical and ruthless, but they've also created a lot of enemies who might be willing to support us if they believe we can actually win this fight. David's phone rang with a call from Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Barnes, his former commanding officer who now worked in Veterans Affairs and had heard about the incident through military networks. Her voice carried the authority and concern that had made her respected throughout the Army as someone who protected her soldiers both during and after their service. "David," she said without preamble, "I've been monitoring the situation with Mia. This has the potential to become a national story about military families and civilian discrimination. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny and support?" Her question contained both warning and promise as she outlined resources that could be mobilized if the local battle escalated into something larger. The conversation with his former commander reinforced David's understanding that this incident had implications far beyond Cedar Falls, potentially becoming a symbol for broader conflicts between military and civilian values in American society. "Colonel, we're not looking for a fight, but we won't back down from one either." Mia defended herself appropriately, and will stand by that truth regardless of the consequences. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes's approval was evident in her voice as she recognized the same integrity that had made David an exemplary soldier and leader. "Outstanding. I'm activating veterans advocacy networks and media contacts who specialize in military family issues. If the Chen family wants to make this about more than a high school incident, they'll discover that veterans protect each other across all branches and generations." While the adults planned strategy and prepared for extended conflict, Mia sat in her bedroom reviewing the homework assignments that had become secondary to the crisis swirling around her actions. The molecular model sat on her desk like a monument to the principles that had led to this confrontation, its complex structure serving as a reminder that some things were worth defending regardless of personal cost. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from classmates who had witnessed the incident or seen the viral video, their reactions ranging from admiration to fear to warnings about the Chen family's reputation for destroying anyone who challenged their authority. Several students shared stories about previous victims who had been forced to leave Cedar Falls after crossing Jessica or her parents, creating a pattern of intimidation that had maintained their dominance for years. Emma Foster, a sophomore who had been one of Jessica's victims the previous year, sent a private message expressing gratitude for someone finally standing up to the bullying that had terrorized Riverside High's student body. "Thank you for doing what the rest of us were too scared to do," she wrote. "Maybe now things will actually change, but be careful. The Chens destroyed my family's business when I tried to report Jessica's behavior to the principal." The message confirmed Mia's suspicions about the systematic nature of the intimidation she had encountered, suggesting that her confrontation with Jessica represented a challenge to an established power structure rather than an isolated incident between students. Her choice to defend herself had inadvertently become a symbol of resistance against corruption that extended far beyond high school social dynamics. Other messages carried warnings about the Chen family's resources and ruthlessness, describing legal battles that had bankrupted opponents and social ostracism that had driven families from the community. The theme was that nobody successfully challenged the Chens without facing comprehensive retaliation designed to serve as an example to anyone else who might consider similar resistance. Dr. Walsh called David's house as evening approached, her voice carrying the strain of someone caught between competing pressures from wealthy donors and professional obligations to maintain educational standards. "Mr. Rodriguez, I wanted to update you on our investigation and warn you about additional pressures we're facing from multiple sources." David activated the speakerphone so that Kelly O'Brien could participate in the conversation, understanding that veteran advocates possessed experience and resources that would be crucial for navigating the political minefield ahead. "Dr. Walsh, we appreciate your commitment to fairness. What additional pressures are you referring to?" The superintendent's sigh was audible as she outlined the coordinated campaign already being mounted against the school district by Chen family allies throughout the county's political and business establishment. "We're receiving calls from city council members, county commissioners, state legislators, and major donors demanding Mia's immediate expulsion. The pressure is unlike anything I've experienced in 20 years of education administration." Kelly leaned forward with interest as she recognized tactics that had been used against military families in previous cases throughout the country. "Dr. Walsh, have any of these calls included specific threats against district funding or your personal employment? We need to document any attempts to corrupt the investigation through financial coercion." Dr. Walsh's hesitation suggested that such threats had indeed been made, but that acknowledging them would create additional complications for her already precarious position. "Let's just say that some conversations have been more pointed than others about the consequences of failing to properly address this incident according to community expectations." David's military training immediately recognized the coded language that indicated systemic corruption designed to prevent fair treatment for his daughter. "Doctor, if you're being pressured to ignore evidence or violate your own policies, that's something we need to address through appropriate channels. This isn't just about Mia anymore. It's about whether your district operates according to law or money." The three-way conversation continued for another hour as they discussed strategies for protecting the investigation's integrity while preparing for escalation that would inevitably attract state and federal attention to Cedar Falls' handling of military family discrimination. By the time they hung up, all parties understood that this incident had grown beyond local control into something that would test fundamental principles about justice and accountability in American institutions. That night, as the Chen family's lawyers worked through the evening preparing legal documents designed to destroy the Rodriguez family's life in Cedar Falls, David and Mia sat together on their back porch discussing the choices that had led to this moment and the challenges that lay ahead. The peaceful suburban neighborhood seemed surreal given the battle being waged over a teenage girl's right to defend herself against theft and intimidation. "Dad," Mia said quietly, "what if we lose? What if their money and influence are enough to get me expelled or arrested? I can't keep moving from school to school. But I won't apologize for protecting myself and Mom's memory." Her words carried the same determination that had driven her actions in the chemistry laboratory. David looked at his daughter with pride that mingled with concern for the battles ahead, recognizing the same courage and integrity that had driven him to enlist and serve his country despite the personal costs involved. "Mija, we fight because some things are more important than comfort or safety. Your mother would be proud of you for standing up to bullies, and we'll face whatever comes next together." The sky over Cedar Falls seemed peaceful despite the storm brewing beneath the surface, but both father and daughter understood that tomorrow would bring escalated conflict as the Chen family's comprehensive campaign of revenge began in earnest. The viral video had made Mia's actions a national symbol of resistance against bullying, but symbols often became targets for those who profited from the systems being challenged. As they prepared for bed, David checked the security system he had installed around their house and reviewed the emergency procedures he had taught Mia for situations where civilian authorities might not provide adequate protection. His military experience had taught him that enemies often escalated to violence when legal and financial pressure failed to achieve desired results. The Rodriguez family slept fitfully that night, knowing that their peaceful life in Cedar Falls was ending, and that the battles ahead would test everything they believed about justice, courage, and the price of standing up for what was right. The Chen family's wealth and influence guaranteed that this would become a war rather than a simple disciplinary matter, but military families understood better than most that some wars were worth fighting regardless of the odds. The viral video reached 20 million views overnight, transforming a local high school incident into a national debate about bullying, self-defense, and privilege in American education. News vans lined the streets outside Riverside High School as reporters sought interviews with anyone connected to the confrontation that had captivated social media audiences across the country. The hashtag #JusticeForMia began trending as military families and anti-bullying advocates rallied around the Rodriguez family's cause. CNN's education correspondent arrived in Cedar Falls with a camera crew and research that exposed patterns of wealthy families using influence to escape consequences throughout the school district's history. The Chen family's previous victims began speaking publicly for the first time, sharing stories of systematic intimidation that painted Jessica's behavior as part of a larger culture of entitled aggression that had operated unchecked for years. Attorney General Patricia Sullivan announced a federal investigation into civil rights violations and educational discrimination after receiving hundreds of complaints from military families who recognized similar patterns in their own communities. The Justice Department's involvement transformed what the Chen family had hoped would be a local victory into a national examination of corruption and accountability that threatened their carefully constructed power structure. Richard Chen's emergency meeting with his political allies revealed the extent to which federal attention had undermined their ability to control the narrative through traditional pressure tactics. City council members who had promised support began distancing themselves from the family as national media scrutiny made their corruption visible to state and federal oversight agencies. "This has spiraled completely out of control," Mayor Thompson admitted during the closed-door session at Chen's corporate headquarters. "We can't be seen supporting bullying when the whole country is watching. The federal investigation means we have to follow proper procedures rather than handling this privately." His words confirmed what Richard had feared. Their local influence was worthless against national attention and federal oversight. Dr. Walsh received direct communication from the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, informing her that the district's handling of this incident would determine federal funding eligibility for the next fiscal year. The message was clear. Any attempt to punish Mia Rodriguez for defending herself would result in immediate loss of millions in federal education grants that kept the district operational. Jessica's return to school became a public humiliation, as students who had previously feared her openly expressed support for Mia's actions. The cast on her wrist served as a constant reminder of her defeat, while the viral footage had permanently destroyed the aura of invincibility that had maintained her social dominance. Former victims found courage to share their own stories, creating a cascade of revelations that exposed years of systematic abuse. Tyler Brooks and Connor Walsh faced their own consequences as additional security footage revealed their participation in multiple bullying incidents throughout the school year. College recruiters withdrew scholarship offers after seeing video evidence of their intimidation tactics, destroying athletic careers that had seemed guaranteed just days earlier. Lacked the Chen's resources to fight the mounting evidence of systematic misconduct. Mrs. Hamilton testified before the school board's emergency session, presenting comprehensive documentation of unreported incidents involving Jessica and her associates that painted a clear picture of administrative negligence. Her professional testimony, combined with security footage from multiple incidents, made it impossible for board members to claim ignorance about the toxic culture they had allowed to flourish. The evidence shows systematic bullying that was ignored because the perpetrators came from influential families, Mrs. Hamilton stated during her presentation. Ms. Rodriguez's actions were not an isolated incident of violence, but a defensive response to escalating aggression that should have been stopped years ago by proper administrative intervention. Principal Anderson's resignation was announced during the same board meeting as parents demanded accountability from administrators who had prioritized donor relationships over student safety. His replacement, Dr. Michelle Carter, brought 20 years of experience dealing with privilege and bullying in affluent districts where family wealth often conflicted with educational justice. The federal investigation uncovered financial documents showing the Chen family's donations were structured to influence disciplinary decisions and academic policies in ways that benefited their children while disadvantaging others. Internal emails revealed explicit discussions about protecting Jessica from consequences through administrative pressure and selective enforcement of school rules. Mia's return to school became a celebration as students organized rallies supporting her courage and demanding systematic changes to prevent future bullying incidents. The self-defense club she had promised to start attracted over 200 members, transforming from a small group activity into a movement that empowered students to protect themselves and others from intimidation. Dr. Carter implemented new policies requiring immediate investigation of all bullying reports, regardless of the families involved, and established anonymous reporting systems that couldn't be influenced by parental pressure or financial considerations. The changes represented a fundamental shift from protecting wealthy donors to protecting all students equally. The Chen family's legal strategy collapsed when attorney Marcus Blackwood was sanctioned by the state bar for attempting to suborn perjury from medical witnesses and filing fraudulent documents containing false claims about Mia's actions and Jessica's injuries. His disbarment proceedings became another element of the national story about corruption and abuse of legal systems by wealthy families. Richard Chen's business empire began crumbling as federal investigators discovered tax evasion, labor violations, and fraudulent contracts that had been hidden through political connections and bribery. The national attention on his family's behavior had attracted scrutiny from multiple agencies that revealed decades of criminal activity disguised as legitimate business operations. Margaret Chen filed for divorce and relocated to another state with significant assets hidden in offshore accounts, abandoning her husband and daughter to face the consequences of their actions alone. Her betrayal completed Jessica's isolation as former friends and associates distanced themselves from a family that had become synonymous with corruption and abuse. Jessica's therapeutic intervention began at a residential facility specializing in adolescents who had used wealth and privilege to justify harmful behavior toward others. The program required acknowledgement of responsibility and genuine remorse before attempting rehabilitation, a process that would take years rather than the quick fixes her family had previously purchased. 6 months after the chemistry lab incident, Mia received the Presidential Award for Educational Excellence and was invited to speak at a White House conference on bullying prevention. speech emphasized that self-defense was sometimes necessary, but that systematic changes to school culture were the only permanent solution to protecting vulnerable students. The Rodriguez family's lawsuit against the school district resulted in a substantial settlement that funded anti-bullying programs throughout the county and established the Sarah Rodriguez Memorial Scholarship for military children facing educational challenges. The money also enabled David to start a nonprofit organization helping military families navigate civilian school systems. Riverside High School was transformed from a place where wealth determined justice into a model for other districts facing similar challenges with entitled students and corrupted administrators. The changes attracted national attention and federal funding for programs that prioritized character development alongside academic achievement. Emma Foster, the sophomore who had thanked Mia for standing up to Jessica, became student body president on a platform of protecting victims and preventing future bullying incidents. Her election represented a complete reversal of the school's previous culture, where fear and intimidation had determined social hierarchies. Dr. Walsh's leadership during the crisis earned her recognition as a national expert on handling wealthy family pressure in educational settings. Her testimony before Congress helped shape federal legislation requiring transparency in school disciplinary processes and preventing financial influence from corrupting educational justice. Tyler Brooks spent his senior year in anger management counseling and community service, working with middle school students to prevent the bullying behavior that had destroyed his athletic career and college prospects. His genuine transformation became another success story for intervention programs that addressed root causes rather than just punishing symptoms. Connor Walsh transferred to a military boarding school, where structure and discipline helped him understand the difference between strength and aggression. His letters to Mia included apologies and updates on his progress toward becoming someone worthy of respect rather than fear. Mrs. Hamilton received the National Teacher of the Year award for her courage in documenting systematic corruption and protecting student rights despite pressure from wealthy families and intimidated administrators. Her example inspired other educators to prioritize professional ethics over financial considerations. The Chen family mansion was sold to pay legal fees and federal fines, while Richard Chen began serving a federal sentence for corruption and tax evasion. The family's fall from power became a cautionary tale about the ultimate consequences of using wealth to avoid accountability for harmful behavior. Mia graduated as valedictorian with offers from multiple universities that valued both her academic excellence and her demonstrated courage in standing up for justice. Her acceptance speech emphasized that true strength came from protecting others rather than dominating them, honoring her mother's memory through service rather than selfishness. The molecular model that had sparked the initial confrontation was donated to the Smithsonian Institution as part of an exhibit on courage and conviction in American education. The protein structure that represented her mother's struggle with diabetes became a symbol of how scientific knowledge could honor memory while inspiring others to defend what mattered most. Staff Sergeant David Rodriguez was hired as the school district's Director of Student Safety, bringing military precision and integrity to policies that protected all students equally, regardless of their family's wealth or influence. His leadership ensured that the changes implemented after the crisis would become permanent, rather than temporary reforms. 2 years later, Jessica Chen completed her therapeutic program and wrote a public letter accepting full responsibility for her actions and apologizing to every student she had harmed during her years of bullying behavior. Her rehabilitation was genuine but couldn't undo the damage she had caused to countless victims over the years. The documentary about the incident won an Emmy Award for exposing how wealth and privilege could corrupt educational institutions while celebrating the courage required to challenge systematic injustice. The film inspired similar investigations in other communities where wealthy families had purchased exemptions from rules and consequences. Mia's college essay about the incident emphasized that true victory wasn't about defeating enemies but about transforming systems that created those enemies in the first place. Her reflection on the events demonstrated the wisdom that came from choosing justice over revenge and rehabilitation over retribution. The chemistry laboratory where everything began was renamed the Sarah Rodriguez Memorial Science Center, honoring Mia's mother while celebrating the courage her daughter had shown in defending her memory and her principles. The dedication ceremony brought together students, veterans, and advocates who had supported the family during their darkest hours. National legislation inspired by the case required all schools receiving federal funding to implement transparent disciplinary procedures that couldn't be influenced by family wealth or political pressure. The Rodriguez Rule became shorthand for policies that protected students' rights to defend themselves while ensuring that justice was based on evidence rather than influence. 5 years after the incident, Mia returned to Riverside High School as a medical student researching diabetes treatment, her career choice honoring her mother's memory while helping others facing similar health challenges. The school that had once seemed hostile now welcomed her as a hero, whose courage had transformed an entire community's understanding of justice and accountability. The legacy of those few minutes in the chemistry laboratory continued rippling outward as other military families found courage to challenge discrimination, and other students learned that standing up to bullies was possible when armed with truth, courage, and community support. The molecular model might have started it all, but the real chemistry had been the transformation of fear into hope and injustice into accountability. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.